Record, jetzt sind wir on. Welcome to Pax Europiana, the podcast about peace and prosperity in Europe. And I'm very honored to have a very special guest today, Peter Jungen, chairman of the Peter Jungen Investment Holding, one of the leading German investment and business angels, a venture capitalist. And also in his long and established career, Mr. Jungen was member of the Mont Pelerin Society, chairman of the Project Syndicate, of the European Business Angels, the European chairman, and the Chinese Business Angel Association, advisory council of the German Bank, and also board member of the New York Philharmonics, and then also in the Schumpeter Society, and the presidency of the German Industry Federation. And he got the Lifetime Achievement Award of the European Business Angel Network, and also in the year 1999, the Great Merit Order of the German State. And to this day, Mr. Jungen is one of the leading venture capitalists of Germany, and has been also very active in German economic policy making and also on the European level. I'm very honored that you take time this morning to discuss with Pax Europiana. And please, can you present yourself to the audience? Mr. Jungen, the floor is yours.
Well, you have already said more than you should. So actually, I cannot detract from what you said. But maybe just one observation. Thank you very much for your very kind words. And it gives you, maybe it gives an impression of a variety of things which I've been trying to do. And some of them I'm still doing. Thank you.
Mr. Jungen, the ideas of our discussion is about the next German economic miracle and how to get there. Because unfortunately, we have challenges in Europe, which we face. And I would like to ask you about your perspective. What are the most important things we have to do right now in Europe, in economic policy in Germany and in the European Union?
Well, the first thing is to clarify, will there be a European miracle, an economic miracle, or in Germany? I recall a story which was someone told in Alpbach. He said, someone spoke about the German economic miracle. And an Austrian participant said, oh no, the miracle was only in Austria. There was no miracle in Germany. After all, you have worked for it, whether that is right or not. But it goes to the heart of the matter. A country which is not ready to work for an economic miracle will not have an economic miracle. And I'm not so sure whether Germany is prepared for an economic miracle. If I look on in the political debate in the country, it has not very much to do with the real important issues in the world. The most important issues in this country at the moment is concerning pensions. It's reducing working time, maybe daily, maybe weekly, maybe lifetime. So at the moment, we are preoccupied with all the other things, which are not part of the ingredients of an economic miracle.
Mr. Jungen, let me take you back a bit in the history also of German unification. 30 years ago, Germany was really changing the world. Eastern Germany was opening and there was unification. It was such a dynamic time. How have you personally experienced the German unification? What was your role in? And can you describe the dynamic of the 1990s in Germany?
Well, on a more timely remark, I was in the Reichstag in the night from the 2nd to the 3rd of October, 1990. I was in front of the Reichstag at midnight when the federal president announced German unity. And that was really a huge moment. What happened then? Helmut Kohl spoke about blühende Landschaften. He was saying blowing blossoms and landscapes. People thought okay, when Helmut Kohl makes that statement, it is going to happen. They didn't get him right. He was thinking about telling his people in the Eastern Germans, tell them, if you take your destiny in your hand, you can make the flowers blowing. But if you wait, it's not going to happen. So many people got him wrong. But at the end of the day, Helmut Kohl was proven right. He knew that the people in East Germany were finally hungry in more than one sense, and that they wanted to demonstrate that they could achieve something if they are let to do that. And that is exactly what happened. Unfortunately, it was the West Germans which were the problem, because West Germany imposed all of her bureaucracy on the East Germans. And the East Germans had thought communism is a very bad thing for economic prosperity. They didn't know the West German bureaucracy, which could eventually be even worse than that. And with the bureaucracy West Germany or the Federal Republic imposed on East Germany, never ever the economic miracle in the Federal Republic of Germany in the 50s and the 60s of the last century would have been possible with the bureaucracy we tried to impose on East Germany. So the biggest obstacle for the economic well-being of the East Germans were unfortunately the Federal Republic and its bureaucracy, and a lot of well-meaning politicians.
You were referring to Mr. Kohl, Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of German unity and also of European unity, because the 90s were also the time of the Maastricht Treaty and also of European currency unification. And so Europe for the first time had a stable common currency, and it was very dynamic times. Have you met Helmut Kohl personally and during your professional experience?
Oh, well, yes, quite often.
What's your take on him, on this great European and his contribution also for German and European unity?
I've met Helmut Kohl over the years. I met him intensively in the second part of the 90s, 1990. And I met him in the time between the fall of the wall and German unity. And those were the days when he really performed unbelievable well. Many years later, Zelig, in a discussion in New York, said, oh, we all know now from his side that the time span between the fall of the wall and German unity was very, very brief. We all didn't know how brief the time span was, because it was in a year later when Gorbachev was tumbled down, when Gorbachev's rule was finished. And what could have happened if those atomic weapons in East Germany still being placed there could have come in the hands of those people who started a rebellion against Gorbachev? So Zelig said the time span was very short. And in the discussion, I made the remark and said, Mr. Zelig, you're absolutely right. The whole difference between us here in this room, and this was about I would say about 2010. The difference between us and then was Helmut Kohl felt the window was open only for a short while. And that is the way he pushed everything. He pushed everybody, and he accepted a lot of pressure from the outside, like the one from Mitterrand when Mitterrand made a condition for his agreement to German unity that Germany accepted the euro almost immediately, although in all the reports we had, the idea of a common European currency was the end of the integration process and not midstream. And all the problems we have in the Eurozone result from the fact that Mitterrand has pressured Helmut Kohl into accepting the euro as a quid pro quo for the French government accepting German unity. And never forget, France was at that time one of the 4 members of the 4+2 discussions. So France could have maybe not blocked it. For that purpose, the Americans were much too trustworthy, and in particular, the personal relationship between Helmut Kohl and President Bush and Jim Baker. But he could have prolonged it. And as we know, if he would have been able to prolong that over October 3rd until 8 or 10 months, it could have meant the end of the whole exercise with with Gorbachev rule coming to an end. So Helmut Kohl had to accept a lot, and he paid for it a lot. Germany paid a lot for it, and we're still paying for it, together with other countries who were forced or thought they should become a member of the Eurozone, and they never should have become a member of it, at least not until now.
Mr. Jungen, it was very dynamic time, the end of communism, the fall of the Iron Curtain. Suddenly the whole world economy was booming, and it was an unprecedented start of global prosperity. Unfortunately, some countries have less performed. Some countries have really taken up very enormously in the last 30 years. What's your take on the last 30 years of globalization?
Well, do you know what? There are some countries in the world who are doing very well, who are doing better than ever in their history. They're a great performance. They have 30 years and grown over, in average, more than 10% over that long period of time. And they feel that this globalization is a great thing for them, that the world were ready for them, almost waiting for them, supplying the whole world with almost cheap, very competitive products. People who understood very well the market mechanism of the world market, people who understood globalization perfectly, and they understood how globalization would work for them, as if they would have had a market economy and being part of it for a long time, although they never were. And this is the Chinese. The Chinese is in a remarkable development since they had about $100 GDP per capita per year before Deng Xiaoping. And after Deng Xiaoping, life changed dramatically. China is now about $11,000 per capita, per capita of the population. It is an interesting development to see how this country performed. And there are not many examples of that, of countries who could simply or similar perform. We have, since the 60s, in the world, a bit more than 40 countries who grew more than 7 or 8% over a period of 10 years or longer. And most of them, 35 of them, who performed economically well are Democrats, are democratic countries. The only exception, which grew beyond 10,000 US dollar per capita without being a democracy is China. So maybe most people are not aware, we see this year, whether or not a country which goes beyond 10,000 US dollar per capita of the population in GDP terms will grow and continue to grow further without being a democracy. That may change the perception of economic and political governance in the world dramatically at a time when the West is not in the best situation you could think of, and where Europe is not at all in a very good situation. So China would be the first country in the world with 10,000 US dollar per cap without being a democratic country. And the interesting thing enough, in that period of time, Russia, the former Soviet Union, shrank in GDP terms. I think from a Chinese point of view, they are irrelevant. Maybe one day it will be the word which Henry Kissinger once used about Obervolta. And he said, there's a country with atomic weapon, but the economic importance of Obervolta, of Upper Volta. So China is going to lead the pack. China, and if you look at the present numbers in the Corona crisis, it is a very interesting observation that China is growing for these 3 years, which are in 2021, 22, by about 8 to 10%. The US is growing, and if you take the 3 years together in the recent forecast, for the Eurozone, there's almost no growth for that 3 years together. So we will see a divergence coming up between the dynamism in China and in Europe at the same time.
Mr. Jungen, in the 90s, the big driver was also the development of the internet, and in Germany, especially the so-called dotcom boom. Did you personally invest, and how was the dynamic of this dotcom boom, which busted then in 2000? What was your experience with this euphoria of the internet in the 90s?
Well, no, we were not hurt by the so-called dot-com bubble and the stock market hype and that. But we co-founded in that years, we co-founded Idealo, which is the leading comparison shopping platform in Germany. And we were a co-founder of it with 3 other very shrewd guys. And so that was a great investment for us. And we have sold this after all, as we are, as a friend of mine who was the chairman of the New York Angels always says, we are in the business of maybe growing companies, but the most important thing is we are in the sales business. We are in the sale of startups. And yeah, that's what we're in. So our experience was okay.
In this year 2000, it was also the moment when Europe decided to have this Lisbon agenda. And that was the declaration to be the most competitive economic area, the most successful economic area, the most beautiful economic area. It was decided at the EU Council to be that. What's your assessment now, 20 years later?
It was decided, and that's the key word, was the most innovative economic region of the world. Okay, we are today, what's the outcome? We are a less important economic region in the world. This Europe, without the UK, is shrinking dramatically. And it is far away from having become the most innovative region of the world. It is probably today something like, I don't know, maybe is in the world is number, depending on what you think, is number 3 or 4 or 5, but it's definitely not the most dynamic and most innovative region in the world. It's neither number 1, it's nor number 2, and it's maybe number 3 with a long distance between that. So the gap between the most innovative regions in the world and the EU in the meantime has grown, and it did not shrink. So exactly the opposite development of what people thought is going to, or what they were proclaiming was going to happen.
In the year 2000, during the Lisbon Agenda process, you were the chairman of the European Network of Business Angels, and you promoted the establishment of venture capital culture in Europe. So what is your take? Was there no taker? Was there no improvement in the venture capitalist infrastructure?
Well, it definitely has improved. We have a lot of hundreds of angel networks in Europe. And I remember well when we founded this with the commission with Erkko Liikanen, who was then the Finnish commissioner. I remember well when he has said to his chief of staff, I do not understand what these people want. These so-called angel investors. After all, they are already rich people. So what do we have to do with that? It showed that he hadn't understood what this was all about. Now, angel investing in Europe has become a force, absolutely. And when it was founded, there was no regional network on the continent. The only angel network in Europe was in the UK. Nothing on the continent. Today, after Brexit, it would be a disaster. There would be no angel network in Europe, but that's not true. There are in many countries in Europe, hundreds of business angel networks. So this is a flowing and growing industry, definitely. But angel investing is a part of the funding of pre-seed funding for startups. Angel investing is a part of a food chain. So is on pre-seed and seed money for growth, is later sale, and then finally we have private equity and then maybe exit IPOs. The problem is, in those many years since then, more than 20 years since then, the world has grown. The venture capital industry is the food chain for angel investing. So it's a kind of a precondition. And the better the food chain is, the better venture capital industry is developed, and the deeper it is developed, and the broader, the better for angel investing, because for the angels, important is venture capital, because that is the promise for growth financing and is maybe an exit opportunity. Since then, venture capital industry in the world has undergone a dramatic shift, even much more to the US than ever before. And after that, to China, not to Europe. So venture capital in China investing today is substantially higher than in Europe. And in the last 3 years, China venture capital per capita was even higher than in Europe. It may be a little bit more normalized now, but we see dramatic shifts. In the United States, for instance, we see a boom last year again, in the middle of Corona, a growth. And we have numbers for the first 3 months of this year, which are unbelievable. Europe has grown, even Europe has grown, but more on a later stage. That is on the private equity and shortly before ahead of the of IPOs. But we see dramatic rise in China, in the US, and though we see some growth in Europe it's very much diversified. The very positive in Europe is the North, interesting enough, Scandinavia and the Baltics. Estonia is an incredible development. This is looks like our Israel in terms of IPOs and venture capital, in terms of this new development. So in a nutshell, yes, it has been established in Europe, but in the same time, the 20 years, it has grown very much so substantially in the United States, and in the last 6 to 8 or 10 years in China as well.
Mr. Jungen, in 2001, the world was shook by this terror event, by this terrible day of September 11. And you, who are also in the board member of the New York Philharmonic, the city you love, New York, was hit so hard by these terrorist attacks. And it was a moment of global crisis. What was your reaction on that one? And did you then visit America and try to bring America and Germany closer together in this moment of crisis?
Well, yeah, I remember very well. I was in Cambridge when it happened, at the University of Cambridge, at an angel investing seminar. Yes, a few days later, I flew to New York. And had a letter with me from the Lord Mayor of Cologne to the mayor of New York City. Handed over this to him when he spoke at there was a concert given by the New York Philharmonic, and they played Brahms, a German, Ein deutsches Requiem von Brahms. I remember very well that this was an amazing event to see that the New York Philharmonic choose this piece of Brahms with the German title, Ein deutsches Requiem.
It was dramatic moments. Mr. Jungen, you are one of the key persons in the German-American business relations for many decades now. Can you answer, and let me ask you, why there was never a possibility to have a free trade agreement between the European Union and the US, because we are so close allies in NATO, and this famous question about TTIP and about our better economic cooperation and trade?
I think these were some people who, to be mildly to them, is that I would simply say they just didn't get it. It never understood the importance of trade. These were people for whom globalization was strange. These were people who thought free trade is bad, and free trade with the largest military force in the world is even worse. Probably the governments would have given a lot. We would have the agreement now, and there are still efforts being made together with the Biden administration to come to some similar thing. Whether the Americans are still interested in, will wait to be seen. But in the meantime, the world is dramatically changing. And there are too many people still think, oh, we could do alone in the world. We don't need America. I think it was never more stupid than now.
Mr. Jungen, in 2001, there was also the world-changing moment when China joined the WTO, still at 1 trillion GDP, and now it's 14 trillion GDP. What's your take? Was it the right decision to include China in WTO? And was it beneficial for the whole world? And how to interpret it, this amazing success of China in the last 20 years?
I think it is very important to integrate China into that. No question. It's very important to understand that a free trade and with the World Trade Organization is much better to have some rules than no rules. And interesting enough is that China has done well, but the world has done well. The American consumer is the biggest profiteer from WTO and from the low-cost products shipped to the United States. So I think we should continue a way to find an accommodation with China on all of these issues. What is the alternative? China was the largest economy in the world in the 15th and the 16th century. India and China were, for 18 of the last 20th century, were the largest together at almost more than 50% of world GDP. So the exception were 2 centuries only. So they're back to this. And I don't want to go back to the year 1000 after Christ. That was the time when, at that time, Asia accounted for 80% of the then known world. I'm not saying we're coming back to that, but we come back to the 18th centuries where India and China were on the basis of 50%. China has 11, now let's assume 10 or 11,000 per capita, so it's 1.3 billion. India has substantially less, but almost exactly the same number of people. It's not written that over time, that India will be less productive than China. And in India, traditionally, if you go to Africa, who is the dominant economic force were there? Before Idi Amin in Eastern Africa, it was the Indians. It were the Indians in South Africa, in many parts of the world. So who says they will be stuck where they are? They will not. So that means this world will face dramatic changes. We are a large part of the world. Jesus Christ, we are a very small one. People think Germany is an important country. Well, Germany is 4.5% of world GDP, and the percentage is shrinking, which is good news, which means other people also become well off, which is very good for a trading nation and for a country which lives from export markets and from trade. So,
Mr. Jungen,
assume for a second China has 60 billion, has 50,000 US dollar per capita, or 60 like the US, for a second. This is 80 billion. Yeah, 80 billion US dollars GDP per year. A billion, yeah. This is substantially more than Europe, all of Europe, not one country. So we are at the beginning of a dramatic change. If we think we have seen changes, okay, unfortunately, I won't be present, but wait another 20 years, the world will be looking very, very different from today. And those who listen, who will experience that, you better get trained for that.
Mr. Jungen, we wish you a long life and also to see all these changes.
Thank you.
Mr. Jungen, the situation is now today in 21, there is the debate about the China investment agreement. Do you recommend the ratification of the EU-China investment agreement?
Well, why not? Simply, why not? Why should we not do it? Should we say, who is against this? I could understand that maybe the US administration would say, give me a break, think a moment about this and this and this. And maybe we can find common ways. We need a joint approach. But what I'm hearing from important institutions who have no legislative power whatsoever is the so-called European Parliament. It has nothing to do with these things. They think we can influence China. We can put a penalty on them. This is ridiculous. We have to understand what is going on there and then to continue to engage them. We had a so-called Cold War with the Soviet Union. And that was, well, was it 40 years or so? Don't you think we should take the time with China to engage for 40 years? But 40 years ago, if you look at in our numbers, China was a very poor country. And it was in 78 when Deng Xiaoping started and took power in China. So it's basically the time since then. So why shouldn't we engage in China? And there will be a lot of things we don't like. And the Chinese will tell us a lot of things they don't like. Maybe we can find more which we do not like than the Chinese do not like with us. But there's no way that we can draw and paint the world as we like to see that. I'm not going to minimize the events, although I have not enough information on that. But I think always ask myself, what is the alternative? Shall we tell the German car manufacturers stop selling to China? A great idea. If we would do that, I think Volkswagen is selling 42 or 43% of all cars it manufactures worldwide in China. Similar is by value with Daimler. And they are facing the shift to the electrical car. The electrical car will, according to a new study from the IFO Institute last week, is going to cost 200,000 jobs in the automotive industry. Fine. We're not going to sell to China anymore. This is half of this. Half is almost 400,000 to 500,000, plus the suppliers. It's altogether 2 million. And if half of that is China, of course, we're ready to sacrifice that. This is 1 million jobs in the automotive industry and the suppliers because of the Chinese market. And then of the rest, half is due to electrical car. So if the German politicians are ready to sacrifice 3/4 of the workers in the automotive industry and its suppliers, then we will be taken serious. But I'm waiting for a proposal as to that. And as long as we do not hear that, this is only all for the gallery. Nothing to write home about and nothing to take the people who speak like this, to take them serious. If they want to be taken serious, They have to dig into the matter, dig into the implication, to understand the problems, to maybe help the Chinese on the issues, and to accept the consequences.
Mr. Jungen, you're also a member of the German SME Union of Mittelstandsvereinigung. Unfortunately, in '96 or so, Germany stopped to reform a lot, and there was a high unemployment then at the end of the '90s and at the beginning of the 2000s, up to 4.5 million people unemployed. And then came Agenda 2000, this new 2010, this new reform program of the German government to reform the labor market and the welfare system, so-called Hartz IV. What's your take on this reform agenda from 2002 onwards? Was it successful?
Okay, first of all, the lack of reforms is not due to the SME union. I want to make this clear, as you know. The second, yes, the so-called reform agenda, you refer to the Schröder government.
Yeah. Yes.
It was helpful for Germany. It put Germany back on track. Unfortunately, the members of the Schröder's party, of the SPD, do not like it and tell everybody how bad it is. As a result of that, their party is doing very badly because they are not ready to stick to what they have told the people this is the right thing to do. And I think there are not enough idiots in the population who understand quite well that they have improved their life dramatically through being able to work and find a job. And all the governments after Schröder, which is basically CDU-CSU governments, and in particular Chancellor Merkel, knew exactly that without Schröder's agenda, they would not have been as successful as they were. And worse, they knew they would not have been able to push that through in the CDU-CSU, in their own party. As I know, from very reliable sources up to the top of the German government in the last 16 years.
Mr. Jungen, in this period...
And if you ask me from whom, I tell you.
Please ask me, yes. I don't want to push you on that, but...
Chancellor Merkel once told me, I know, we owe them a lot. Fortunate for the CDU is that the SPD as a party abandoned their own strategy and didn't back in, didn't profiteer from the fact that it led to the employment of 2.5 or 3 million people more than before. And it was in particular people who didn't find a job before because they were not very well qualified. So I think from a social point of view, it had a lot of advantage. It was given a chance to people who otherwise would have been left out. And I have difficulties to understand why people who the whole day are talking about inclusion, the whole day are talking about we will not leave someone or singly one behind. Why they are brutally tell the people it's better you do not work than you do that job.
It led to an unprecedented rise in the employment numbers in Germany, and millions of people were integrated in the labor market again. And it's until Corona, to my best knowledge, it was the lowest unemployment numbers in history. And it's an incredible success, the whole reform process.
It's not the lowest unemployment in history. After World War II, Erhard, we had the problem that we didn't have enough people. So we had to get the Gastarbeiter. But until the late 60s, yeah, we were short. But you're right, it was for the last 30 or 40 years, it was the best employment thing. And that is thanks to, has to, a lot to do with Schröder's agenda policy. I jokingly once said, the CDU should consider to make Schröder an honorary member, but there were not enough supporters for that.
But definitely a historic achievement, especially also in the light of EU enlargement. In these years, you were also the vice president and later the president of the SME Union, the Small and Medium Enterprise Union of the European People's Party. And this was the time where 10 new countries, and also later then Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, 30 new countries joined the European Union. And what's your take on enlargement and the stability and potential it has brought to Central and Eastern Europe and the whole dynamic of the EU?
Well, I always considered 2004 as a linchpin in the history. And as when many of these countries joined the EU, and I thought, for me, the reunification of Europe was a very important event in my life. I recall when we went to Warsaw, for instance, to other countries, Slovenia and Croatia, and where we were. And at the very day of when they joined the EU, and in May 2004, and it was really a historic moment to see that relations between Germany and Poland were almost at the best in their history ever. They were always very difficult relationships. And that had nothing to do with communism. The history of Poland and Germany was intertwined and was very often overshadowed by German-Russian relationship. So you could always say, when Berlin and Moscow were on speaking terms, it usually was very unhealthy for Poland, as you could visit in history. And therefore, I thought the time we were there in 2004, it's probably, you could say in Warsaw, as I did. I'm glad to be here at a time which could be really called and considered to be the best time in our bilateral relations ever. And that is true. And therefore, I'm still glad. And we have to accept there are different people, there are different politics. I do not need to be a foreigner in Germany to find a number of things in German politics awkward. It's enough to be a German to find it awkward. And I could very well imagine that people from the outside find it awkward, as maybe some German people or European members of parliament find policies in Poland difficult to accept. But we have to live with the fact. We have to live with the fact that there are different ways of political governance. And I don't see that we have always the best solutions. I'm not going into the details, but I have a lot of examples where I wonder myself how German or Western European politicians could accuse Poland or even Hungary in terms of judiciary and judicial system and compare that with their own country. For instance, the nomination of the High Court to Supreme Court judges. When some people are there, accuse them that these are political nominations. It is difficult to see in a country like Germany that any of these nominations is not politically driven. For the simple thing, there is a committee in the German Bundestag, and this committee decides. Now, how can they ever find an agreement unless They agree all, which is stupid to say, but they only agree, I get one, you get one, you get one, and you get two. And then I get two, and you get one. And so, obviously, is the way how this is done in many countries. And there's no reason to be sort of superstitious about the rules and governance rules in other countries. I'm not saying this is all perfect, but I've met a lot of the politicians in these countries who are still prime ministers in their country. And I know my impression was a different one, but maybe they've changed, I don't know. But we have to simply live with different people. Probably we all are very different and hard to accept for other people. And that's okay. We can live with this, but we then have also to live with other people having different opinions and looking on their history, in which Germany played a major part in almost all of the Eastern European countries.
Mr. Jungen, in these years, in the run-up of the EPP Congress 2004, you had legendary debates about economic and social policy reforms with President Martens in the Committee for Economic and Social Affairs to prepare, the former Prime Minister, and at that time he was the President of the European People's Party, together with all the new countries to form a new growth consensus in Europe, a new competitive Europe. And what was your debates with Mr. Martens in these years?
Well, Mr. Martens, Winfried Martens, was always very helpful, I have to say. He asked me once whether I would be ready to take the chairmanship of the Economic Policy Committee of the EPP. And before I said yes, I asked him, why do you ask me? Well, he explained in length that he thought it ought to be strengthened, the profile in economic policy. And I said, oh, that's easy. He said, why do you say that? And I said, oh, should be easy. There is not much of a profile in economic policy. And he changed that, I have to say. He accepted a lot of changes. He accepted a lot of documents of which he himself asked himself, is that what we want? But he encouraged us always to move ahead and to not be shy of a debate. And therefore, I have very good memories about it. Maybe there was one thing which I know that he was always very fond of, and having a very close and good relationship with Helmut Kohl. And at the time, he thought maybe other people also have a good relationship with Helmut Kohl. He probably knew I had some relationship with Helmut Kohl. So, but although that was never a discussion between the two of us.
In these years, there was the big moment of the Slovak economic miracle with the flat tax and with Ivan Miklos. And there was also the big debate leading to the Leipzig CDU Congress in 2003, and the idea of the CDU really being a reform party for economic reform in Europe. And you have been quite influential in this debate, I think, in the spirit of Leipzig at that years.
Well, what else should I say then? Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. This was a time when we thought Leipzig didn't live up to the expectations, if I may say that mildly.
The expectations were very high, and there was also Mr. Kirchhoff proposing tax reform in that years. And then Mr. Wolf, he has torpedoed the whole project.
I know.
You remember, Mr. Wolf?
Yes, of course, I remember very well. Yeah. You should know your friends and you should know your non-friends.
Good. You don't want to go into details. Okay, Mr. Jungen, the situation was in these years, the German government was very heavily lobbying for so-called Daseinsvorsorge, public welfare, for German Landesbanks to have an exemption from the competition law of the European Union in order to have a state liability, state backing, which led them to make wonderful investments in the United States. And then this all ended very ugly in the great financial crisis. Let's cover the topic of the great financial crisis. What is your take on it? How did it hit Europe? Why did it come? And what was the effect on Germany?
Well, you could put it very in a short note. It's probably one of the single biggest blows for Europe, because a lot of this was done in the name of Europe. A lot was proclaimed to be very European, but it was done on in a very unprofessional way. And there were too many governments who tried to be bankers. And there were too many governments who thought, we don't have to accept these rules. So also the rules of capital markets. And they were substantially proven wrong. And they paid very dearly for it.
It was very costly for the German taxpayers?
Very much so.
Then in 2010 came the so-called Arab Spring, which is maybe more appropriately discussed as the end of socialism also in the Arab countries, because most of them were socialist economies. And then there was, of course, in some chaos, some success. You are also very experienced in Saudi Arabia and many of the Arab countries for the German bilateral relation. Do you think Germany and the EU had the appropriate answer for these opportunities of the democratization of the Arab world?
Well, first of all, it was not a democratization of the Arab world. If it would have been so, we would have not been prepared for it. We had no idea how to deal with this. We may have ideas of democratization, which are very narrow. And without the history in this part of the world, you will never understand this. I'm not sure whether that was about democratization. It was about young people wanted to get rid of old rules and old habits. And it's not surprising that this whole thing did not come about immediately. But there are effects. If you look today, the Middle East, this is the good news and the bad news at the same time. The bad news is the world is less interested in the Middle East. And the bad news is the bad news. And the good news is the world is less interested in the Middle East. Why? Oil is not important anymore. To have a lot of oil can be a problem today. So it may be the first chance for the region to go on its own. And if you look in the recent developments, the last couple of months with the Abraham agreements, maybe we see the first hints with countries entering into diplomatic relations with Israel, with having Morocco as a member in the time of President still Bush. There are now 5 or 6 countries who have diplomatic relations. And this would not happen without Saudi Arabia would have accepted that, without themselves entering and doing the step. This is not possible for the time being. But they're also now forming groups of enemies. You have all of a sudden Gulf states lining up with Israel and the support of Saudi Arabia. And they say that our enemy is not the West, our enemy is Iran. Whether or not that is true, it's a different matter. But then you hear there are talks between the Saudis and Iran. So we may think in some time to come, further major changes in the Middle East. And it is like large empires die slowly. And we still see the aftermath of the dying of the Ottoman Empire was the emergence of a number of artificial nations who never had existed before in history, like Iraq, Syria, and so on. They all were Ottoman provinces in a relative benign rule. And then the world changed, and then the oil came, and they became the playground for all the interests of everybody in the world. Maybe the Middle East is in a situation where, for the first time in its post-war history, is in a situation where we might be in for positive surprises. And I'm, at the moment, more on the side of those who expect positive surprises than negative surprises. The incredible potential in the Middle East, which could develop between the trading nations of the Gulf, between the people from the desert, who still are the richest people in the Saudis, and the Israelis, with their incredible entrepreneurial spirit, and the same entrepreneurial spirit you have with the people from the Gulf, joined with the technology development and the science approach of the Israelis, could lead to a combination of forces in that regions we have not seen before. So I would be optimistic about the Middle East.
Mr. Jungen, in 2009, there came the government of hope and of optimism also in Germany. There was a CDU liberal coalition with Mr. Westerwelle as the vice chancellor. And there was the big topic was tax reform, obviously, because that's the missing puzzle in German economic policy, to reduce your super high tax rates. And there was hope that this will happen and the German economic miracle might have happened then, but it was not to be. What's your take? Why did the tax reform not happen in 2010, 11 at these decisive days?
Well, there was not the majority for it. Very simple. The majority wasn't there for it. And yeah, maybe people always thought about the tax reform is a sort of, it's a separate item. I think people have to understand that this is part of a general approach. If we think there's less state, more private sector, or do we need more state and less private? And tax reform is nothing else than not giving back to people, is letting them a larger share of what they earn before it's been given to government, then redistributed after the government takes a surcharge on the tax revenue for the costs they pretend to, which is necessary to distribute the money again. So tax reform is not an independent thing. It's a part of a reform agenda. And reform is not a one-off thing. This is a permanent way. It's a different approach. And I think we will be coming after Corona. We will be at a situation where we may have to make some fundamental choices. Do we believe in what we're saying, that we are a privately run economy and managed economy? Or do we finally say, well, if it is serious, it's the government? Governments in Corona have proven that they are incapable of doing anything of what they always pretend they are able to do. They're not even able to buy the vaccine. They're not even to organize the supply. And they have difficulties to distribute it. They have done this in other parts of the world, not in Europe. Europe has totally failed. And in particular, the Commission, the European Commission, has fundamentally failed in a job in which they never should have accepted. And even when it was given to them by the German presidency, they should have never accepted because they knew they were not able to do the job. And if you look at the numbers of growth in 21 and 22, and take the year 20 in that, and then you will find out that China is growing over the period of time. The US is growing over that period of time. And the EU and the Eurozone are almost shrinking over the period of 3 years. It will have to do with the fact that the vaccine was provided to Europe much later than it was possible. I was offered dates for a shot in Israel and in New York by friends in both countries since January. And in both cases, they said, but it's German stuff. So give me a break. The commission wasn't buying. The stuff was designed, developed, and partly manufactured in Germany or in Europe. And we were not able to provide this because the people who were in charge in Brussels had no clue whatsoever. So we were not good at it. And as we were not good at it, we have a very bad result. And part of the lack of growth in Europe is due to that simple fact. I'm not going to blame anyone, although one could blame a double-digit thousand numbers of people who died on Corona as a result of the lack of shots. Many of the people could have had their shot in January, February, and not in May or now 3 months or 4 months almost later. So I think we will have to have a debate in Europe. What is Europe worth if Europe isn't able to protect the life of its citizens? And in that maybe most important issue, Europe failed. Although Wolfgang Schäuble always said rightly so, the most important thing is not human life, it's human dignity. And he is absolutely right. So we cannot speak about life without discussing the dignity, that is, without, under the circumstances, people had to live. So we will have a lot to discuss in Europe. There is no way back to business as normal after Corona.
Mr. Jungen, in July 2020, the European Commission Union, together they have decided on a 750 billion rescue recovery plan. And let me ask you, because it all goes back to this lost decade you are talking in your papers about, because in 2012 already we had this Southern European debt crisis, and we have not really had a very good decade in none of the Southern European countries. And especially, obviously, it was escalating in Greece with this now 205% of GDP debt level. What's your take on Southern Europe? What's your take on the recovery package? And what needs to happen to bring growth back to Southern European member states?
Well, I think the programs which have been put in place in Europe are basically okay in the sense of magnitude. The question is, maybe is it enough or is it too much at the same time? And sometimes I have the feeling it depends on what the question is. We have no answer yet, because it depends on what people are going to do with it. What are people in Italy going to do with it? What are people in Spain going to do with that? In France, are they going to use it for structural reforms? Are they going to use it? Or is it just to increase consumer spending? If that would be the case, it would be even worse for Europe to have put these programs in place. If they would finally come, and I have the feeling that Draghi in Italy is trying at least to do that and use this for structural reforms. So it's too early to tell what the value of it is. But if it is just for increasing consumer spending, it would be another disaster for Europe.
About the Greek debt crisis in 2012, it was ultimately regulated that way, that it was accepted, the high tax level, the high debt level, but Greece had to build a privatization fund, which is what we're interested in your opinion, if that was a good idea. And do you think that privatization of Italian state companies and of Greek state companies and of other companies in Europe is the right way to reduce the debt level of these countries and to open up these economies?
Well, it's not as much for reducing the debt level. It's increasing productivity of the economy. It's increasing the productive part of the economy. In East Germany, after unity, the important thing was not to make money and selling these companies. You couldn't make any money. There were some people who were dreaming of you could sell these socialist-run companies. No way. And people were surprised that it cost money. I was never surprised about, for the simple reason, no one could afford to run a company the way it was run. So the only thing was to break it up and to build a completely new company out of that. I know what I'm talking about. I've done this. So it's not about making money for a government. It's about increasing productivity, giving people better job, train the people, make them ready for competition and to take on competitors inside or outside the country. The same goes for Italy. It's ridiculous that each European country is still dreaming. In Europe today, they're still dreaming of a national airline. Usually for all of the airlines, everybody says there should not be any domestic flights anymore. So nobody can have a flight inside Europe, except it is a flight from North to South Europe or East to West. So crossing 3 or 4 other countries. But we want to have a national airline. Why do we need a national airline in Italy? Why do we need a national airline in Spain? Why do we need this in France? Maybe you can ask, why Lufthansa? We don't need all this. This is because we have governments. No one cares for the so-called national airline. And at the same day, the Greens and the environmentalists and everyone who tells us, take the train. Well, if there is a train, yeah, and if you have a fast train, yeah, 20, 30, 40 years to build fast trains. The last fast train in Germany was built 30 years ago with German unity in the 90s. The last piece in West Germany, basically, we still run on the old tracks. And there's a small part behind the German-Belgian border. There's a fast track to Belgium, but not on the German side. And if you see the track to the Gotthard in Basel, from Switzerland on is a fast train, not on the German part. And so these governments are not able to deal with the air traffic, and they're not able to deal with the fast track train traffic. So, and that goes for a lot of other national companies. If Europe makes a sense, Europe should rethink what we mean by Europe. But at present, we still have the notion of a national airline. And as long as there is a national airline, there is no Europe. Could you imagine in the United States, you have national airlines? Okay, you may have a regional airline, which flies then, of course, only in Texas. But this doesn't go to Frankfurt. You never see an American airline in Frankfurt, except one of the 2 or 3 of the very well-known names. And the same should be in Europe. There's no reason for having that. So this is just an example. And unless we will not have that debate, I think we will waste a lot of money in these so-called national restructuring post-corona programs.
So you think that we need European-wide planning for railway, for example, European railway company, or privatization of the existing ones?
Well, I'm not going to in a debate who owns this, but they need to build the tracks. Why in the world are we not building tracks and continued, for instance, in Germany, after German unity? We had a special law. It's called Verkehrswegebeschleunigungsgesetz. This is one word, not a sentence. And it was saying that you had you could sue the government for giving approval for a track, and there was one court you could go to, and that's it. Today, you may be able to block this for 6, 8, or 10 years, knowing you're going to lose. But there are a lot of environmental groups do the play. So we could do much better, but we do not have the guts to do that. I think sometimes I have the feeling they have given up. So there's nothing we can do unless there is a disaster. Then we can do a lot of things all of a sudden. But we're not able to do anything like that for environmental reasons. The app in Germany didn't work because for data protection. So to be very blunt, we didn't protect the life of elderly people in government-run homes, but we protected their data. So the people died in the government-run homes, knowing their life is not protected, but their data will be protected. If this is our life.
After the crisis in the south came the crisis in the east, and Russia attacked Ukraine in 2014 with the start of the Donbass war and the Crimean annexation. And we are since then in a kind of Cold War, hot war, and the confrontation, unfortunately, ever escalating with the Russian Federation. And it has economic impact, obviously significant for Eastern Europe. What's your take on this Russian situation since 2014?
I have sometimes the feeling that the Russian leadership organizes these without any obvious economic viewpoint, without any economic advantage, and without serving any national interest except that of the leadership to keep people on fire. I don't know whether Russia needs part of the Ukraine. And then people say, oh, it was always part of of Russia. And Khrushchev gave it away. We didn't understand the geographics exactly or what. I mean, give me a break. If we start to rearrange for the borders in Western Europe, Germany had, I think, 38 independent kingdoms, dukedoms, and fiefdoms. And, you know, I wish you good luck. We could start all this. And if you then go to Italy, Jesus Christ, before Garibaldi, Italy didn't exist. It was part of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. And the German emperor went to Rome for his coronation, not to Berlin, because Berlin didn't exist, but Rome existed. But sometimes we do, and we accept in the Ukraine a behavior like the Italians and the Germans would start to sort out what they have messed up over the hundreds of years. And that history in the East is much shorter and much younger days. So, but as long as we accept that we take this serious, the arguments, they say that it was part of Russia. But the people there don't want to have that. Obviously, this is not enough because it's the Russian leadership. Are we not able to tell these people, stop this? And if you do not stop this, it's going to have consequences. But if it's in China, oh, we'll come up and say, yeah, this is a human rights word. What is the human rights in Europe? Or you can say Ukraine is not part of Europe. Maybe the people there see that in a different way, because many people consider Moscow being in Europe. And then the Ukraine is not. I don't know. I don't know. I have more questions than answers. And I do find the answers from others.
In 2015 came the next hammer blow. The Syrian war led to a massive immigration crisis in Southeastern Europe and also in the EU, this famous migration crisis of 2015. What's your take? Should we have been early, more active for settlement in Syria, or did we let the situation slip in Syria and then the consequent immigration crisis has developed?
I think we made, A, we let it slip, and B, we made migration much too easy. And now we live with the consequences and try to sort this out. This is probably much too late. And we don't take the European migration laws serious. And if we do not take them serious, who should? None of these people. Why should they? Life here is at the lowest end of the society, much better than there. And we didn't take care of situations, you said, in Syria. But we wonder about China, but we are not able to deal with a situation like this in a country which was artificially created by the French in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, 1916, at the end of the Ottoman Empire, drawn a line kind of in the sand. And we didn't take the West and Europe. We thought, this is nothing we have to do with this. We pay dearly for it. And unless we don't take our own rules and laws serious, why should anyone else take them serious? This is, in Syria, is a war where Russia is supplying arms and where Russia is interested in keeping it going. And I never understand why not our governments in the West are not able to speak, hopefully privately, with the Russian leadership about these issues and tell him, what do you want? Do you want to make our life difficult through the back door? And at the same time, you want our support? We got to be open on that and say very bluntly, it is yes, yes, or no, no. But we have no strategy.
Mr. Jungen, many in Eastern Europe, from Poland, the Baltics, and also Bulgaria, Romania, they see it very much like you, but they don't understand why the German government still continues its support for Nord Stream 2, at the same time funding the Russian aggression in Ukraine and in Syria. So what's your take on Nord Stream 2?
My take on Nord Stream 2 is very clear. Contrary to what many people say, this is not an economic project. This is a strictly political project. We don't need it. We have enough gas and oil. The US is a net exporter of oil now, not a net importer. So the West has enough. But then they say, yeah, this is American interest. Jesus Christ. Who is in NATO? The US or Russia? Who saved us? Who guaranteed the safety of West Germany? Against who? Was it the Americans against Russia or the Soviet Union against the US? Sometimes I'm a bit puzzled, and if I'm puzzled and think it through, and then I come to the conclusion, I shouldn't be puzzled, but we should call it what it really is. It's a blunt nonsense. It is a lie. And therefore, we should be very clear about this. It is a purely political project which allows Russia to finance activities in other parts of the world and also in Europe, if Ukraine is a part of Europe.
Mr. Jungen,
the German economy does not need this pipeline.
Mr. Jungen, in 2016 came then the ultimate check for the European Union. It's the first time ever that a country left the European Union, the Brexit referendum. What's your take on Brexit, why it happened, and why is there so little reaction after it institutionally in the EU? Because it's a big shock to lose a country. First time in such a...
Well, I think it's a big shock. The shock, what you said is absolutely right. And I think we are in a situation that sometimes I have the feeling there are some people who say, oh God, what does it do to us? Well, I think it does a lot to Germany. Not because the Brits were, in a way, kind of closer to the German tribes than to others in Europe in the history. But Europe was, in the EU was entrepreneurial. The UK was innovative. The US was science-driven and science-led. This is all what we, as Germany, will be missing in the EU. So I think the loss of the UK is a disaster strategically for Germany.
Mr. Jungen, in 2008 to 2018, some people, also you have written about it, a so-called lost decade. And when you compare the response of America in GDP per capita after the great financial crisis, it has relatively constant developed. But Europe has fallen back significantly in our lost decade. What's your take on it and why it happened? What we need to do to catch up to North America?
It will continue. will continue. The decline will continue. Why? It's not about the nominal figures. This is only the result of it. But it's a lack of innovation. It's a lack of entrepreneurship. It's a lack of people who are ready to take risks, people to invest. If you have a lack of venture capital in Germany, we do not ask ourselves, why is it? What's the reason? No, we create government funds as if we could substitute at the end of the day innovation through government funds, which is of course ridiculous. So I'm afraid that that process will continue. The decline of Europe is not halted yet.
There's the debate about the ratification of the so-called Mercosur agreement, which is the biggest trade deal now concluded in 2019. Unfortunately, the German government seems, some at least, and also the Austrian government is not in favor of this important trade agreement. What's your perspective on having a free trade agreement with Brazil and Argentina?
Well, I think it's a disaster not to go ahead. I think it's a big mistake. And, you know, quite frankly, there are not many mistakes we can allow, or Europe can allow. There's not much left over. And the interesting thing is that if other people do not react in the way they maybe should do, then it's because I'm afraid it just goes ahead with the feeling Europe is unimportant, or becoming unimportant in certain areas. Okay, there are still traders, that's okay. But there are other parts of the world who are doing a similar thing. Yeah, China is, in terms of trade, will be growing faster than the EU. Sure, it's that in Africa, is in Latin America, and if we leave this part of the world sort of uncovered, it will be covered by others. It will be covered by the Chinese. The Chinese are very different from the Russians. The Russians were never able to do that because they never were able to economically do the right things outside. The Chinese can, and they're able to do that. And therefore, we should be very clear wherever we have a blunt place and wherever we have a blind flag spot, there may be Chinese activities been seen in a short period of time. And so I'm not saying that because I'm against that, but the world is not like you can do, you can leave it. Now, if you don't do that, someone else is taking care and we will be losing out.
There's a big debate about digital tax, that we should tax the big American digital companies like Amazon harder and higher. Do you think that's the right way to be more digitalized?
Well, I have the feeling sometimes that some people think digitalization is for other people to digitalize and for us to tax them. I would rather have it the other way around, that we are digitalized and the hell with the tax, because then we would be much more productive. We would be much more innovative. We would be much faster. We would, in a nutshell, we would be much better off. And I'm afraid the situation of this, the issues of taxation, it's very important. I'm asking myself, why don't they tax them? Are they not able? Are the governments so stupid, or are these guys so clever? I have no answer, because they probably do not want to accept that they be called up in open space, they be called to be stupid. But they must be pretty stupid. And if the tax laws are not according to this, why the hell can this not be changed? There's always someone, maybe in a small country, trying to block that? Don't they understand this? Can't they talk with this country and say, look, this is doing a damage to us? If it does a damage, I'm not so sure. Yeah. And sometimes I would say the governments who deplore the fact that there is no enough taxation from the digitalized companies do not prove that they spend the money they take from taxation wisely. A lot of the money is wasted. And therefore we could say, if it's wasted anyway, why is it needed to be taxed before it is wasted? So maybe the companies deploy it more clever. The only thing is not whether it's taxed or not. The question is who owns the money at the end of the day. Is this millions of shareholders or are this a few people? But most of the large digitalized companies are public companies, and most of them are larger, and some of them are larger than the German GDP. And one of these countries has a larger market cap than the whole German DAX. No.
Mr. Jungen, there's a debate about a global minimum tax now from the Americans. They've proposed it, that there is a global minimum tax for corporations of 21. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, people who tell me I'm in favor of taxation, they are either stupid or they have never worked in their life. Or they do not understand the issue. So with this proviso, I start with this. With this proviso. A minimum tax gives is an easy word. It gives the idea everybody is, according to his share, should pay. This, of course, will never happen. Because the problem seems to be how to define this, how to define profit. There are hundreds of different ways to define profits. And I'm sure that as soon as we have a so-called minimum tax, we will have more exceptions than rules for that. And probably most of them coming even from American companies. So, I think this issue of taxation probably brings us to believe that the governments do not understand the business model of these companies. They were used to have companies who has a product and you can see the product and the product is a car and if the car is there and you sell a car, you pay tax. And if you make a profit, you pay profit. A tax on the profit. But now you can't see the product. But of course there is a service rendered. And why then should not be able to tax that? I come to the conclusion there are many governments who have no interest in the taxation. They tell us everybody is to be taxed. But they think it's great if my companies are not taxed. And I'm sure that as soon as you will have a minimum tax introduced by the American government, the biggest opponents will be Europe. But do you believe that European companies pay more in average than 21% corporate tax? Even not in Germany. We have different corporate taxes in Germany. Not the one, which one? Is it goes to the local government, Gewerbesteuer? It goes to the federal government, Körperschaftsteuer. Then it's distributed to a shareholder, and it's the same income. Then the shareholder pays a tax on that, and then he spends the money, he pays VAT. So it's 4 times at least tax anyway. And if you do that, your tax is not 21, your tax goes beyond 50%. And if anyone would do that, probably they would have an evasion of corporates and mid-sized entrepreneurs leaving the country. So I don't think we will have a minimum tax, because then you would have to have a similar or identical tax system, but you do not have that. And the worst thing is in a country like ours is if you depend on income from corporate, because the corporate pays an income. After the corporate sends a dividend, the dividend is taxed itself, and then the owner of the shares spends money and is again taxed. So where is the minimum tax? Number 1, 2, 3, 4? Is it all adding up? So a minimum tax 21, and that's it. So out of original income of 100, you keep 79. Great. But I'm sure that these people who go for a minimum tax of 21 have a completely different system in their head. They do not understand the issue. And that is why I said it won't come.
It won't come.
Maybe it's bad. Maybe it would be to the advantage of the taxpayer. We've seen the taxpayers in Germany, 70% pay 50% of the taxes. No, I'm sorry, 50% of the people pay 70% of the income tax. And if you then add up what the companies may maybe only pay before, it's a much higher. This is only the portion of the income tax, of personal income tax. So I think it's much more complicated than most politicians can imagine.
Mr. Jungen,
because of laws the same politicians have made. These laws are not being made by the corporations. They're not being made by the entrepreneurs. If they would have to decide, there would be no tax.
Mr. Jungen, the world is very grateful for Germany for BioNTech, this new innovative pharmacy vaccine producer, which has been so fast to produce a vaccine, and it has been so successful now in this fast track thing. It was a state investment, as I understand, and now it was also the idea to remove the intellectual property rights by the Americans. What do you think about this one, and what's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure whether you said before that it was funded with a lot of government support. It was not. BioNTech has been funded basically by two risk-taking entrepreneurs. I really applaud the two people whose parent migrated to Germany, who went to school in Germany, he went to high school in Germany, went to university and became great scientists with an entrepreneurial drive. And these people wanted to do something, not just to find something. They wanted to invent a product. So they wanted to not to know more, to turn money into knowledge. They wanted to turn the knowledge into money back. That is, their knowledge into know-how, into new products and services to serve people. Great. These people have not been funded publicly before 2020, before this early summer 2020. Until that time, they were completely private financed over a period of, if I got it correct, 6 or 8 years. So private individuals put up the money for that company. So it's really a private initiative, all of this. And it's a great job they did. These people developed a technology, and it's not just that they invented something. They developed a new technology, mRNA called, which was originally designed to be applied for against cancer. And now they came up with the application for corona. So we are up for a great development in medicine, and I think it cannot be over exaggerated of the importance of this. So this is great. Second, the U.S. The American partner of biotech, they do not own the know-how. They do not own the patents. So it's very easy for the American president to say, we share our patents with everybody. He doesn't have any patents, except there's one or two smaller companies in the US who have that. But the really big visible success with Pfizer doesn't own them. They're owned by biotech. That's the number one. Number two, I'm surprised to see that the American government throws with a stroke of a pen away the whole IP, which is the basis of innovation, which is the basic of finding the new, which is the basic of finding new products and services. And it won't take long that people say, that's okay, for the next pandemic, why don't take the members of the government off and the members of the European Parliament, and they all take off and concentrate their time on developing a new medical stuff against a next pandemic, whatever it is. This is, of course, a ridiculous proposal because they will be unable to do so. But I think these people, President Biden inclusive, doesn't understand what he's talking about. If he gives this away and says we do temporarily, where's the end? Why should anyone in the world respect IP? And why should then someone develop IP if it's not respected? Why should you take the risk of hundreds of millions of investment? It will block science. It will block new discovery. It will be gone back to the university and that's it. But the worst which is going to happen, it's not the owners of the patents, it's the sick people who will not be served in the future. Because as a sideway, no one is able to produce this medicine without the know-how from the people who have developed it. No one. There's 1,000, I think 1,000 or 200 or something like this, more than 1,000 ingredients you need for that. These are change of supply in the world. If you do not know them, no way. If you don't do, so it's not going to solve a problem in any part of the world, even if you unlock all the patents, and you won't have any stuff from the new manufacturing in India or in South Africa, definitely not in this year. So what's important? Is it important to supply the medical stuff to the Indians and to the Africans now, hopefully, instead of next year? So if you want to do that, you need the support of the companies. And if they say, we concentrate on our own business because you're going to spoil our business anyway, that's it. So why not are these countries clever and make a proposal to BioNTech and say, look, can we set up a factory here? Maybe we take 20%, I don't know, another company, and we do a joint venture or something. They're all looking desperately for more manufacturing capacity. But this must be able to do that. So in a country like India, which has an incredible tradition, pharmaceutical industry, there should be partners who would be better suited than others to manufacture the stuff. And until then, it would be a moral obligation, if we have one at all, to supply these countries with the stuff until they can manufacture themselves with the assistance of BioNTech or those who have the know-how.
In general, let me say also, I think the world is very grateful for German innovation power. In the case of BioNTech, that it was ready so fast. It's a proof that Germany can be innovative and can produce products. Also that venture capitalism works, because this is a product of venture capitalism and not of state funding. Mr. Jungen, let me ask you, the whole world economy since the end of communism has raised about 4 times, from 20 trillion around to 80 trillion. It's enormous success. New Eastern Europe has also developed, partly some countries like Romania, Poland, 6 times better in GDP. But Western Europe and Southern Europe, unfortunately, maybe just double the GDP in 30 years. Yeah. So let me ask you, what's the way forward now after Corona? How to really repeat this dynamic job creation machine, which the German economic miracle of the 60s, but also of the 90s in the beginning. It was this light tower of Europe, the German economy. Can it be the same driving motor of innovation and of growth again in the 2020s after Corona? And what needs to be done for that?
I do not know whether that will be possible. We just cannot replicate developments before. We always have to see what were the circumstances and why was it possible in Germany. We had the lack of it was Ludwig Erhard, definitely. But Ludwig Erhard alone couldn't have done this. It was because of the Americans, in particular, the US military administration, General Clay. We probably owe at least as much to General Clay as to Ludwig Erhard. In the book we published in China, in Chinese, Lars Feld and I, in 1.5 years ago, on the social market economy, we had a short story and a piece on Project Syndicate a couple of weeks ago, where we spoke about this on June 20th, 1948, when the Deutschmark was introduced. And Ludwig Erhard used the opportunity to lift all the regulation on the food supply. And he was called by General Clay and said to Erhard, Professor Erhard, you know, under your contract, you were not allowed to change the rules. And Erhard said to him, yes, General, as I know that. And because I wasn't allowed to change the rules, I lifted the rules. So, Clay smiled to Erhard and said, but Professor Erhard, all my advisors are telling me a market economy will never work in Germany. And Erhard said to the General, don't worry, my advisors are telling me the same. So that is what happened in June 48. Thanks God, it was only General Clay who could decide this. There was no German Bundestag and no German government. And I'm absolutely convinced a German Bundestag never, ever would have lifted the regulations and on the foodstuff supply in Germany, because they never believed in a market economy. They never believed in that people could organize this much better, as you see now during Corona crisis, yeah, as the private sector does this completely without any government supplies, help whatsoever. And so they could do it much better, and they did it much better. So thanks God, there was no Bundestag who could have blocked this. And because the Bundestag came in place only 1 year later, or almost 1 year and 3 months later. So thanks God, Erhard could decide this on his own. So you have to oversee the circumstances. I'm not so sure whether that will be repeatable. In the sense, you probably need a population at the time would say, okay, everything else has been tried after World War II, nothing works. So maybe with Erhard and his crazy ideas, it will work. And it worked. I'm not sure whether we have a similar situation today. I'm rather convinced, say no. It's up to other countries. You spoke about the 4 times the world economy grew since the war came down. But China has grown 30 times in that period of time. And it's still going strong. It's still growing with 6-7% a year. And you know what? If they grow with 6 to 7% a year, they double at about 11 to 12 years GDP. So it's very easy to predict that GDP per capita in China in 10 years' time will be 20,000. So that's a middle income country. And whether they make it or not, I don't know. As I said before, until now, no country ever has grown into the bracket of larger than $10,000 per capita without being a democracy. So any prediction about who is going to make it or not is very difficult and not impossible. But the ingredients is easy to understand. We don't have to repeat this for the sake of that conversation now. But if people understand and apply them, it works. And you look in Eastern Europe, in many countries it has worked. And look in Asia to Asia, in many countries it has worked. Asia is not only China. Chinese population in Asia is only 1/3. It's only 1/3. Some people consider that as a promise that China isn't everywhere. Some people consider that as a threat, that there are even more of that than the 1.3 million. And we have to live with the fact. We have to be better. And if we are not better, we will be placed at another end of the table. And that's fine if people accept that. But I'm sure they will blame others, the weather and the Chinese and human rights. And without all this, we would still, and less workers, we still would be better off than others. No, it doesn't work. Markets are, in that respect, you can't argue like the virus. You can't argue with the virus and you can't argue with markets. Why not? It's because the strengths of the individual people, the billions in the world you're dealing with, you cannot argue with them. You can maybe influence them with your probably positive offering, with developing new products and services, with bringing them to markets at a price which is acceptable for people. Then we will be able to flourish. If not, we will continue to decline. It's not going to be a disaster, but the beautiful days are over eventually, and that will not come back on its own.
Do you think society, a global economy, which is growing so well, like 4 times in the world, and so many new opportunities, it's also, I think, a clear success of capitalism, of the market economy in the last 30 years, which is a very positive development to global prosperity. So it's working.
Well, the market economy has proven that it works. And it works not only in Western Europe, and not only in Americas, and not only in Asia, or even in China, and India, in Africa, everywhere. Why? It is because of the people. because it's to understand the people. Adam Smith always considered not the wealth as his most important book, but another book, and that was on moral sentiments. And that's where he used the notion of empathy, where people feel with other people, that people feel related to other people. And Adam Smith probably has understood more about what drives markets, what makes a market economy work, and more understood than a lot of other people. I'm not going to blame anyone who studied sociology today or what. They probably understood more of the people than me. It's all about the people. And if you want to do it about people, then markets is the interchange. Social market economy or the market economy may have one example, the ordoliberalism, if I may use the German word, the German ordoliberalism, always believed in a strong state. It's not the Manchester capitalism. It's not where people say a weak government is important. No, markets work only if there is a strong government and there is a strong state. Why? You need the one who is setting the framework, and you need the goalkeeper, and you need the referee. But too many politicians in our countries mix up the role of the player and of the referee and of those who set the rules all at the same time. That is not only, this is not going to work. It's been proven over and over, but it always will be tried again. So a lot of people have to pay the bill again, although you could know it is not going to work that way. So you need a strong state, you need competition law. It was Ludwig Erhard. It took him 8 years to introduce the competition law in Germany against Adenauer. Adenauer was influenced by the Federation of German Industry, and they were against competition. These guys all came from the cartels, from the Weimar time and the 20s and the 30s. I'm not blaming anybody. That was the way they were brought up. They had no other idea in their life on business and economics and markets. And Erhard used the trip of Adenauer in 57, before the federal elections, used the trip to the United States. And at the time, Adenauer had to go with the boat. So he was away for almost 2 weeks. And in the meantime, Erhard was installed as the vice chancellor to run the government during the absence of Adenauer. And as soon as Adenauer was gone, Erhard introduced by a resolution of the cabinet, the antitrust law into the parliament. And he knew that the parliament was in favor, but Adenauer not. When Adenauer came back, the then president of the Federation, Fritz Berg, was furious and tried to get Adenauer and convince him to sack Erhard, and to remove it from parliament, the legislation. But then Adenauer proved he was a true parliamentarian. He said, Herr Berg, it has been sent in an orderly fashion by the German government cabinet under the vice chancellor Erhard, in my absence, has been sent into the parliamentarian process. This is the due course for a law to go. And I am not able, as a chancellor, to change the parliamentarian rules. So that was the way it went through. Otherwise, it would have probably not go through, at least not in that period of time. So you need a strong state, you need competition. And if you have that, you have the right ingredients for a good economy. And maybe there are a few things in the United States one has to think about. Some people say social market economy. I'm not so sure. Erhard once said on his 70th birthday to Friedrich von Hayek, He said, Herr Hayek, don't get me wrong. The social market economy doesn't need the word social in front of the market economy. For the simple reason, the market economy as such is social because we are able to fund and support all those people who are not able to support themselves. And that is the social, about the social market economy. So Erhard and Friedrich von Hayek were very clear about what they were talking about. And maybe what some people call Manchester capitalism, that's American. Of course, that's historically stupid. This is because Marx and Engels never understood what was going on in the United States, in England. Maybe there are some elements in this European version. We might look into it more carefully, because of a long run, the word of inclusion, to have many more people to be part of the economy through their education, to be taken seriously, that was very much in the idea of the ordo liberals, of the Röpke and Böhm-Barwerk and Walter Eucken and so on. And I think that in the long run makes the people feel more comfortable. When people today speak about Manchester capitalism, they don't know what they're talking about. The people in Manchester capitalism felt they were very well off, because until that day, there were absolutely lawless workers on the farm of the English gentry. Had no rule, no money, had no laws and no rights whatsoever. And here, the first time they were free working in a factory. Of course, it were bad circumstances. But Marx, the biggest mistake Marx ever made, he never understood what was going on in England. He was not a good historian, obviously. What Marx saw, he thought, I'm seeing the bloody end of capitalism. But what he saw, but he didn't realize it, what he saw was he was watching the bloody birth of capitalism. And it's sometimes the blood at the birthplace looks similar to a patient who is very sick. He obviously got it totally wrong. Thanks, God.
And the last 30 years were basically the German economic miracle repeated on the global stage, quadrupling of the global GDP in 30 years. Unfortunately, Germany and Austria here, where I'm from, did not so fully participate. But nevertheless, this is a very optimistic discussion and perspective, hopefully for the future of the world economy, and also a call for more reforms in Western Europe, and a wake-up call also for the European leadership from Peter Jungen, 30 years of experience in European economic policies and also in investment, calling the European elite to really live up to the challenges of the 2020. I'm very grateful that you took time for a 2-hour interview. It was a big intellectual effort, and thanks a lot. We covered, I think, a lot of important topics. Not all can be covered in one interview, but maybe there's also the opportunity in the future to invite you back on the show. And thanks a lot that you took time. Now at 7 o'clock, I think your family will be happy if
I have another meeting.
Also time for dinner.
Okay. Well, thank you.
It was very nice that you took time. The best regards to Cologne.
Thank you.